In Florida, it's not a flood zone or non-flood zone. It's a high-risk flood zone or a low-risk flood zone. And if something happens, a lot of it will be underwater, especially in Pinellas County. So we do encourage people to purchase flood insurance. If you're in a low-risk zone, it is a lot less expensive than when you are in a high-risk zone.
This episode brought to you by Suites at Madison. Meeting and conference rooms for rent by the hour, week, month, or year. Suites at Madison, where business gets done. Check them out at www.downtowntampaoffice.com. Now, on to the show.
You are listening to the Invest Florida Real Estate Show, covering topics in lending, buy and sell strategies, property management, hot markets, and tips and tools to guide you along the way on your path to real estate success. You want Florida investment real estate talk? You have come to the right place. And now, our hosts, Eric Odom and Steven Silverman.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Invest Florida Real Estate Show. This is your co-host, Eric Odom, along with Steven Silverman. Steven, just got back from our national conference with TCN Worldwide in Austin. Austin's an interesting place. It's a lot of music. It's sort of, Nashville, Texas, Nashville. I think the Texas people will be a little irritated that I put it like that.
Well, I mean, Austin's is like a beacon of light. It's a happening place. Texas is growing very fast. Austin's growing even faster within Texas, but we're growing here too in Florida. So I got calls today from brokers in Texas that have clients that want to come to Florida. So markets are moving.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We obviously have ARC Investments coming to St. Pete, coming to Florida. That's a big deal. We're out in Austin and looking at all the tech firms that are located there and continuing to add tech firms. Tesla's moving to Texas. But I mean, they're not the only ones. I mean, there's all sorts of activity happening in and around Austin. You can see it. Of course, it's a very, very vibrant city. But it really is. The sun is shining on Texas and Florida right now. We're sort of in the I-4 corridor in Tampa, probably the hottest industrial market in the country. There's just a lot of activity happening, and it's a good place to be if you're in commercial real estate. Steven wanted to take just a minute to read a review. It's so important to get these reviews because it is hard for us to do programming for the show. And when you guys take your time and leave us a review, it really is an investment in the future of the show because guests look to see who's listening. And they want to see that there's positive feedback when they come on. And, obviously nobody wants to do this for kicks and giggles. They're obviously in it as professionals and hoping that there's eventually going to be, whether it be a deal or a connection with somebody in our audience. And that's sort of why they come on and take their time and invest their time with us. So when you guys leave reviews, it really helps us. And so we have YSFL786 through Apple says, love the content and the sense of humor. And he left us a review a couple weeks ago, and that was just getting around to read it now. But we do read all the reviews, even the ones that are negative, Steven, even though we don't have too many negative reviews.
Yeah, I haven't seen any, and actually, if there are, I don't want to hear any. Well, you can read them.
I was going to say, when they do, it's about you. So anyway, we did. Hey, YSFL 786. We do appreciate you taking the time. If you've not done so already, we would appreciate. If you're a listener, we don't do this for any kind of sponsorships or anything. So this is your way of sort of giving back to the show. If you've not done that, please do leave us a review. It does help with future guests, and it helps us to recruit folks that can come in and impart their wisdom on us. Steve, we've had a lot of changes in flood insurance recently, and so we thought it'd be a good time to reconnect with our friend Chris Coleman and talk about what's going on with flood insurance, important issue for folks here in the state of Florida.
Very important in Florida. So let's roll right into it. Today we have with us Chris Coleman. Chris and his brother Dave are founders of Coleman Insurance Agency based in Pinellas County, Florida. Chris is a returning guest. We last spoke to him about 5 or 6 years ago when there were changes on flood insurance and everyone was concerned. And you can go back to episode 8 to listen to that. It's time for an update. Lots of things going on. So Chris, welcome to the Invest Florida show.
Well, thanks for having me again. I really appreciate it.
Hey, Chris, it's great having you on, but I got to call Stephen out a little bit because he's a little bit like lost in space sometimes, because that was actually 7 years ago, Stephen.
You know what, Eric?
Ooh.
It just makes me realize how long I've been sitting in this chair opposite you, that we're going back 7 years on this podcast, and I'm still staring at you. But somehow I soldiered through. I'm surviving and thriving. So, and I'm going to learn about flood insurance. So.
I guess time really flies when you're having such a good time.
Yeah. It's hard to believe, isn't it?
It's one way of putting it, Chris. One way of putting it.
Yes.
So Chris, last time we wanted to speak to you, and actually, Eric brought that up, but that was right when we began doing the podcast. I think you were episode 8, so that was 2015. And at the time, there were changes that were made in 2012 to flood insurance in Florida, and then in 2014 there were revisions to that because there was such a hue and outcry. And it's happening again. There's all talk of flood insurance changing, and Florida, the way we're surrounded by water, it has a huge impact on real estate, on investment, and on the economy. So maybe you can tell us what's going on.
Yeah, give us a little 30,000-foot overview of like what's changing now. Why is everybody up in arms?
Yes, there's a lot of changes that are going on as of right now. October 1st, 2021, most of the changes went through for new business, and they've remapped basically all of Florida. So some people that were not in flood zones are going in flood zones. There's some people that were in flood zones that are going to non-flood zones or low-risk flood zones. They're changing base flood elevations, so some are increasing, some are lowering. So everyone seems to be getting some kind of change on their policy, whether it's a positive change or negative change. It just depends where you are. The big thing that's changed is to new business with quoting. It's back a couple years ago, there was pre-firm and post-firm quoting, and it depends on what county you're in. And the firm date is when FEMA came in and mapped out your county. So if you were in a flood zone or your house was built before they did that, you are pre-firm, so you don't really need an elevation certificate to get a quote. So they could quote you. If you got an elevation certificate, they would just give you the best quote available, whether it was with an elevation certificate or without. After the year, like Pinellas County, I believe, is 1972. So after that, you're post-firm. So you had to have an elevation certificate just to get a quote. You cannot get a quote without one. So if you were pre-firm, you could. If you're post-firm, you could not. Now with this change, everything went to pre-firm. You don't need an elevation certificate anymore to at least get a quote. You can get one, and it could help you out. Most of the people that we've seen, it does help out, but if it doesn't, we can do whatever's best. So they're trying to help out people. If you get an elevation certificate and the price is more, then you don't need to use it. So if you don't have one, they do encourage everyone to get one because they want to charge your true rate. So if you don't have one, you will be getting an 18% rate hike every year until you get one, and then see what your true rate actually is. So that is one of the downfalls. The people in V zones, they've kind of done away with that. And those are the people right on the beaches. So, and the V stands for velocity. So it's not really the flood that affects the structure. It's the waves that bang into the house. They've kind of done away with the V zones, which is helping those people out. But a lot of people that we've seen that we've quoted, the premium is going up.
Whoa, so that's amazing. So the ones that are really the highest risk. Don't get me started about the fact that so much the flood appears, let's say appears, that it's a lot of people who don't necessarily have a high flood risk subsidizing those who do. And just seems like this is another one of those. Chris, is that fair?
Well, they are being charged quite a bit if you're on the water. They're just doing away with the velocity and rating for the flood. In the new building codes, it really affects the older homes that are out there, because the new building codes, if you're by the water, you have to be so many feet in the air. So most of the homes by the water are being built 15, 17, 18 feet in the air above the garage. So those aren't really affected too much by the flood. The downstairs will be, but not the actual structure, unless it sweeps away some of the dirt underneath the foundation, and then it jeopardizes the whole structure, and it may have to come down.
So what are you seeing in terms of the rate increases? I mean, I know it's hard because it's going to be all over the board, but...
Yeah, we actually just quoted a strip mall in Pinellas County. It was on the west side of US 19, kind of in Palm Harbor. And they were paying, I believe, like $112,000 for flood insurance. With this new rate, we got it for $42,000.
Wow.
So I haven't seen, we're working on it now. We have the underwriting looking at that, because that seems like too big of a jump low. But when we were talking to her on the phone, she said, hey, if that's what it came up with in the computers all has the programs in there. If that's what it's coming up, then that's probably what the rate's going to be. So it was a great savings for that person. But then other ones we've seen that are going from 2,000 to 8,000 or 4 to 12. So yeah, it really, really depends on where you are. It can make quite a few $1,000 difference just being a block away from someone else that has a flood zone, that's in the flood zone, that's paying flood insurance.
So in that first example that you cited, was that a property that previously was in a flood zone and then got moved out of a flood zone?
No, they were still in the flood zone. Their base flood dropped quite a bit. So now they are above where they were because of the base flood dropped. Say the base flood was at 10. Now and they're at, say, 9. Now the base flood dropped to 8. So now they went from a foot below to a foot above base flood. So now they're desirable for the flood because there should be a foot above where the flood should go to.
So it's happening they're rolling this out, right? So in other words, people whose policy now will expire in January, they're starting to get notifications of like the new policy, or how is that working, Chris?
Correct. Once they change, it's all new business from 10/1 forward, and from existing business, it's as you renew. So whatever change happens on 10/1, if you have an April effective date, you're not going to see it till April because you're in a year contract. So they can't change the rates midterm, but at renewal, you'll see whether your premium goes up or down.
So, Chris, one of the things that is interesting to me is there are services, and they've been on the podcast also, that look at the different flood areas and are able sometimes to take properties out of a flood. If someone sees their flood insurance really increasing, they can help move them out and protest. And are those still viable with the new maps and rules? Are those kinds of services still viable?
They could be. Yes, there are some companies out there that will reevaluate your flood zone, which that's kind of what FEMA just did. There has been some companies out there that the person that comes out there is the engineer. He's kind of everything. So there's no checks and balances. He will measure and say, if you're now a foot above, he signs off on it and says, yes, all these ratings are correct. And then they get paid based on 1 year of your premium. Yes, it does save the person that is at that structure, but with no checks and balances of someone measuring and signing off on it that the measuring is correct, it could or could not be correct. Because if he doesn't save you money, they don't get paid. So they want to save you money so they can get paid. And usually when they take you out of the flood zone, the FEMA will refund you last year's premium, and that's what they get paid. What last year's premium, what you get refunded, that's my fee. So he's going to these apartment complexes and going to strip malls and saying, okay, now you're out of a flood zone. I'll sign off on it. You hand this in and you get last year's premium back. And then that's my fee for that. So just be careful on that. But the best thing you could do is flood proofing your building. That's metal structures by the openings, the doors or windows, or what, as long as it holds back a certain percentage of water within 48 hours. And there's companies, you need an engineer, the companies come out and install the flood proofing. That will give you a huge discount. There's a couple companies around that will do that. You can Google them and look. We've turned some people onto it, and their premium went down like 75% of the flood proofing.
So is it fair to say that, we have other things going on in the market now? People are worried about capital gains. Investors are rushing to buy properties. They're doing their due diligence. They're going through everything business as normal. But really, they should be paying attention to whether the property they're looking at changed the rates at all. Is there a way for them to assess that?
Yes, there is a website. You can Google. It's on FEMA's website, depending on what county you're in. I know Pinellas County that we're in. You can Google flood map changes Pinellas County, and they have a link right to the FEMA website where you can put in the address, and it'll show what the flood zone it's in and what it's being changed to.
Yeah, and the flood zones, you can use that FEMA map anywhere in the country.
Yes, correct. Yes, yep. But I don't know from county to county if you can go onto the county and it'll jump to that map, or you could just go straight to FEMA. And yes, it's all over the United States. And even if you're not changing flood zones, it'll change your base flood was this, and now it's going to this. So you can see where the base flood, if they made a change on anything also.
So if you had a client and he was an investor and he looked at FEMA and said, hey, I just saw that my base flood is changing from 9 to 10 or whatever it is, would you be able to tell him in dollars how it would affect his annual flood insurance premium?
Right now, as of 10/1, I could give him a quote on that property. I can let him know what the premium will be with the new rating. I can't tell him what it'll be with the old rating because the old ratings are out of the system now. Like if it was a 9 and it's going to a 10, I can't tell him what 9 would have been, but I can tell him what the new rate would be. If he gets an elevation certificate, it could be different. That's what we usually encourage people to do, is get an elevation certificate. So that'll be the true rate of what you will be paying. If it's more, we don't have to use it, but you're going to get an 18% rate hike every year until you get to that rate. And then it'll be normal rate hikes after that.
And would you encourage people that aren't in a floodplain to still get an elevation certificate, or is that just superfluous?
We encourage them to get flood insurance because in Florida, it's not a flood zone or non-flood zone. It's a high-risk flood zone or a low-risk flood zone. In Florida, if something happens, a lot of it will be underwater, especially in Pinellas County. We got the bay on one side, which is going to push water up into us and have nowhere to go, and the Gulf on the other. So we do encourage people to purchase flood insurance. If you're in a low-risk zone, it is a lot less expensive than when you are in a high-risk zone.
So any other things, just I know we're talking about flood, and part of the reason we're all concerned about flood is we're all thinking of global warming and things like that. Are any other things going on just that you can think of where global warming is having an effect on investors?
Climate change.
Yeah.
Climate change.
Climate change. I'll be politically correct, but how it's affecting insurance and properties besides flood?
That I really don't know. Too much of it is affecting the flood. Is that where, because the more states, unfortunately, Florida pays in the most out of every state into the FEMA flood, and most of the other states collect more than Florida. Texas pays in the second. I think they're the leading one. Louisiana, now New York and New Jersey, they pay in near the bottom, but they're collecting near the top. It's just an unfair distribution of who pays in and who collects. And that's what spawned the private flood market a couple years ago. A couple of the insurance companies said, hey, if we can get some of this and charge what Florida should be charged compared to what they're paying out, we can gobble up a lot of this market. And a couple years back, private insurance companies started their own flood insurance companies.
So, Chris, if people want to contact you and learn a little bit more and investigate flood insurance or other types of insurance, how can they contact you?
The best way to get a hold of me is call in my office at 727-441-9911, or they could always email me at Chris, CHRIS, at Coleman, COLEMAN, agency, AGENCY, FL.com, like Florida. So Chris at ColemanAgencyFL.com.
Awesome. Chris, as always, we appreciate you coming on. We've had a lot of questions as people have been confused about what's going on in flood insurance. Obviously, it's a hyper important issue for investors and homeowners alike in the state. And so it's always a pleasure to hear what you have to say and get us updated on what's going on in the market, because we have been fielding quite a few questions, and I think it clears it up a little bit. Stephen?
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. And we'll be seeing you out in the market.
That sounds good. I always have a great time on the podcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris.
Let's hit 1 million downloads.
Okay.
Thank you.
And that was Chris Coleman talking flood insurance. So important in the state of Florida. Chris has been gracious enough to come on the show a handful of times over the years, Stephen, to let our listeners know what's going on when there's been big changes. And we haven't had him on for a while. Unfortunately, there's not been any big changes, but we've been fielding a lot of questions recently. So we all thought it was appropriate to maybe to revisit with Chris and learn what exactly is happening. What'd you think, Stephen?
So it's an important topic because so many people just don't think about flood insurance, like people coming into Florida or investing that are not in the market and familiar with it. It's not even something that they think about. They get a surprise later. So it's important. You have to consider that, as well as property taxes and just regular insurance and maintenance when you're looking at your building carrying costs.
You folks that are from out of state, those are the two biggest issues that people get surprised by: flood insurance and property taxes. Because we don't have state income tax, our property tax rates are fairly high in the state of Florida. And it's a big shock when you pay twice as much as the previous owner was paying, and you get your tax bill the first time, and it's like, whoa, what happened there? And then, of course, flood insurance, they're in flood zone and not paying attention, and they get through the due diligence period, then here comes a big flood tax bill, and that could be a shocker too. So always good to have folks, professionals like Chris, come on and kind of explain what's going on, because it is a substantial expense that investors are going to have to be concerned with. Stephen, Chris, great to talk to him again. How about other great guests?
Well, you can go back and listen to Chris on episode 8 all those years ago, but we have lots of guests on many different topics that you can go into our archives. Go to www.investfloridashow.com and also download the app and listen on your mobile device.
Guys, as always, we appreciate the time that you invest with us each and every episode. And until next time, hasta la vista.
You've just listened to the Invest Florida podcast with Eric Odom and Stephen Silverman. Join us every week for actionable real estate investment ideas, and of course, visit our website at www.investfloridashow.com for more shows and tips on how to earn a cash flow in the real estate market in Florida. While hosts and producers of the Invest Florida show have no reason to doubt the validity of comments of our guests, we do not warranty their accuracy. Please check with your legal, financial, and tax advisors before entering into any investment. Returns will vary from person to person and deal to deal based on unique circumstances. All information expressed in this show is for educational purposes only. Opinions of the guests are not necessarily shared by the hosts and producers of the Invest Florida show.